Okay, so let's start from the basics, and I'm actually going to be using the WPShout article on hooks as a reference because it's very helpful in my opinion. It gives a pretty good outline of the topic. So I'm just going to pick up a screen share here. Okay. And freak out in the chat if you can't see my screen, but I'm pretty sure you guys can. So here's what you need to understand about hooks, first of all. Hooks, oh, okay, here we go. Hooks is a category that has it's a basket that has two things in that basket. There are actions and filters. So when we say hooks, we're talking about there's actions and there's filters, and those both fit in that basket. Just sort of like if we said, Coke, and then there's Coke and Diet Coke. It's like that. That's probably not a great example, but hooks, an action is a kind of hook, and a filter is a kind of hook. And the first thing you need to know is that actions and filters are just two different kinds of WordPress hooks. I really like this diagram that or specifically I put together to help you understand that terminology. So there's two things. There's the hooks themselves, and in fact, we don't spend that much time writing hooks. You write a hook into WordPress using either do action if you're creating an action hook, or apply filters if you're creating a filter hook. But unless you're either writing WordPress core code itself, or if you're writing a theme or a plugin that's going to be commercially available, it's relatively rare that you're creating hooks themselves. It's relatively rare that you're leaving a piece of code sticking out that a future developer can hook onto. And in fact, what we're usually writing is what's called hooked functions, meaning we're usually writing the code that's going to come along and hook onto this hook that's already been left dangling out there by a previous developer. So there are two kinds of hooks, action hooks and filter hooks. And for the most part, if we're just doing client work, building a website for ourselves or a website for our clients, we're going to make use of these existing hooks that somebody else has already left dangling out there. And we're actually going to be writing hooked functions that come along and hook onto those two kinds of dangling hooks that WordPress core and other theme developers and other plugin developers have already created for us. So we write hooked functions that hook into existing hooks. And we write actions, which are hooked functions that hook into existing action hooks, or action functions are hooked functions that we write that hook into action hooks. We write filter functions that are functions we write that hook into existing filter hooks. So I know that's a lot of terminology and it's pretty abstract, but I am going to pause for just like 30 seconds here to see if any questions surface in the chat. There's two kinds of hooks, action hooks and filter hooks. And when we say, I wish I understood how WordPress's hook system works, 90% of the time we mean, I wish I knew how to write hooked functions that come along and grab onto those hooks and let us run code that we want to run. So are there any questions in the chat about that at this point? Okay. Okay, and feel free, I mean, this is absolutely for you guys. So I don't care if we spend 20 minutes on this topic because it's it's probably the most important, it's probably the most confusing thing about hooks. And it's really important to understand. Okay, so when we say we're writing a hooked function, what are we talking about? We're talking about adding any arbitrary PHP code that we want into WordPress's functioning. Especially actions can be literally anything. So you could create a WordPress action function that every time you publish a post, a little piece of PHP code runs and it tells Zapier to tell your microwave to turn on or something like that. You can write an action that does literally anything. Filters are a little bit more specific. Filters take something they're given and they modify it and they give it back, and that's why it's called a filter. So I'm going to show you a couple of, I'm going to show you a quick example of both an action function and a filter function. And I'm going to show you the examples that I give in this chapter, and I'm going to talk through them pretty quickly. So this is an image that I like while we're scrolling. This is the hook. WordPress left a hook, right? This is a hook that WordPress would have left already for us. And we are writing an a function, a hooked function, that's like the worker guy hanging off of this hook. So the hook is just dangling there, and we are putting stuff onto that hook. We're putting kind of work onto that hook, which is why I used this image. All right, so this is a filter example, but I'm actually going to start with an action example. I think actions are a little more straightforward. All right. So this is the code for a very, very, very simple use of the action side of WordPress's hook system. We've got a function that we write, and then we've got our call to add action. Now, add action is a WordPress function that WordPress has already defined for us. Okay, good, I've got something in the chat. Let's see here. Oh, how do I get it while doing a screen share? Oh, here we go. Can't an action function also modify data and pass it back? Or does the do action not look for any value passed back? Good question. So an action is not going to pass back information. So this WP footer hook is an action hook that WordPress registered with the do action function. And you can do anything. Once again, you could do in my footer, put the first 5,000 words of the Da Vinci Code, right? The WP footer hook is not looking for anything to be passed back to it. It doesn't care what you do. It's no longer listening to you. As soon as you hook in, it's like, okay, fine, do whatever you want to do. But it's not waiting for values to be returned to it. And for everybody who doesn't understand what I'm talking about, what I'm talking about will be clearer when we talk about filters. But to answer the question in the chat, no, an action hook is not looking for returned values to be passed back to it. You can return a value to an action hook, but nothing will happen. So let me describe the basic function of what we're looking at here, which is one use of WordPress's action system. We wrote a function, WPShout action example. This is our action function. The function just basically prints out WPShout was here. But when will that function run? We can write this function, but without this line, it would just be a function sitting there and the function never gets called. How do we make sure that we put the code WPShout was here into our WordPress site's footer area? Well, there's a hook that's already dangling out there in almost every WordPress theme, and the hook is called WP footer. It's an action hook, meaning it's expecting action functions to be added onto it. It's expecting functions that maybe echo something, or maybe they save something to the database, but they don't actually return any value to WP footer to work with. So don't worry about that until I talk about filters. But the point is, this add action function, this is a WordPress function that can take many arguments, but I'm just going to start with the two that are required. The first argument is the name of the existing hook that's living somewhere in WordPress core, or in the theme we're running, or in the plugins we're running. That's the first argument here. So we have a hook named WP footer, and that's where we want to hook onto. The second argument is the function that we want to hook onto that hook. In this case, our action function is called WPShout action example, and all that's important is that these two pieces of text have the same name, that those names match. And you can see we're actually passing the name of the function in as a string. That's what these single quotes mean. So we're just passing it in as just a raw piece of text. And when WordPress sees this, it knows to go looking for the function whose name is WPShout action example. And it knows to stick that onto the WP footer hook. And when the WP footer hook fires, meaning when the code is and it sees, oh, do action WP footer, it goes, okay, well, what is hooked onto the WP footer hook? And currently, at least one function is hooked onto the WP footer hook, which is WPShout action example. So when this hook fires, right in that place, WordPress will print out the string WPShout was here. So that's an example of an action of using WordPress's actions system, which is again 1/2 of its hooks system. We hooked onto WP footer, and we wrote a function named WPShout action example that hooks onto WP footer and prints out WPShout was here. And that's pretty much it. That's a dead simple use of WordPress's action system. So I'm going to talk about a very, very simple example of filters next, and then I'm going to get into some real world examples on a site that I run. But I want to pause here and I want to see if anything is coming up around the terminology I've used, or just the sort of core way that this action function and that this action hook and this call to add action interact to create a use of WordPress's action system. Is there anybody to whom this does make really good sense? That would be good to know in the chat as well. Just to know that that this either is or isn't clicking, but not somewhere in the middle. Okay, silence in the chat. Okay, here, I'm gonna drop the screen share for a second. Oh, wait, here we go. Makes good sense so far. Yep, yes. Oh, lovely, okay. Hey, okay, cool. All right, good. So, all right, now okay, thank you guys. That's encouraging, all right. All right, good. So I am going to pick up the screen share again. All right, now we're gonna do filters. And in my mind, filters are a little bit more complicated. And the reason filters are complicated goes back to the question that Norm S asked. Can an action function, I missed, Zoom is not notifying me about new chat. So I'm sorry, I missed Dylan's question. Is it possible to see how it works live if you have time? Yes, definitely. So I will show you a couple of existing examples of actions and filters that are running. But let's get in there and we'll mess around with WPShout's code a little bit before we're done here. Okay, so filters are next, and that gets into this question Norm asked: can't an action function also modify data and pass it back, or does a do action not look for any value passed back? So the answer to Norm's question is you're correct. It is the case that do action does not look for any value passed back. So an action function will not modify data and pass it back. The thing that does look for a value that's passed back is a filter. So again, a filter is a kind of hook, and we write filter functions that hook onto the filter hooks that WordPress and the themes and its plugins leave. And what makes a filter function different from an action? What makes a filter hook different from an action hook is that a filter is expecting something back. It wants to be returned something. So you can see that this dead simple example of a filter is dead simple, but it's a little more complicated than the action example. For one thing, we're passing in a parameter into this function. We've got this sort of magical variable all of a sudden called title. And we're not just echoing title onto the page. We're returning a string concatenated with the title itself. So this piece of code, let's say we put this in a plugin, or let's say we put this in functions.php. What would this code do? Here's what it would do. Every time the title filter hook runs, this code here would go to the function WPShout filter example. It would pass along the title into that function itself. It would change the title from just the title. Let's say the title is migrate post. It would change the title to hooked : migrate post. and it would give that back to WordPress. And what the effect would be is that on our entire website, the title of every post would be hooked and then the normal title of the post. So a filter takes something, works with it, and gives it back. So a great way I like to think is a filter would be great for filtering something like, let's say, profanity from an article. Like it's actually going through. If we ran a filter on the content filter hook, then we would be getting the entire post content in a variable that we could name content or my content or this content or whatever. We could go through, remove any words we don't like, and we pass it back. And then WordPress does what it was originally going to do with that little piece of whatever before the filter was called. So the big thing to look for is a filter function always has this return statement at the end. It's never just echoing something. Because if we just echo hooked and title or whatever, WordPress is going to be like, hey, I gave you this title to work with, and you never gave it back. So I don't know what title anything has. I just assume everything on your website has just a blank title. So that's really how a filter function works. I think a very common question is, how does this title, where does that come from? Did we just get that by magic? Like, did we get it in the mail, right? And this is actually kind of one of those things that's a little bit less visible just by looking at filter functions and filter hooks and calls to the title filter. Really the place to figure this out is to go into the WordPress code base itself. And I'm going to do that right now. I'm actually going to do it for the title, and I'm also going to do it for the WP footer action hook, because I want you to see what these hooks look like when WordPress leaves them dangling out in its code. So let's do the title hook first, okay? So we're just going to do that, and you can see that this is obviously one of the most common searches for the title is the filter itself. So it's a hook, right? Filters the post title. So again, this is the hook itself. We're rarely writing hooks. We're usually writing hooked functions that grab onto those hooks. But now we're looking at what WordPress has already done for us, which is leave this hook dangling out that we can grab onto. And I'm going to show you the source code for so this hook is left dangling out in a file called WP includes posttemplate.php. And let's get in here and see what we can see. Okay, this was the wrong way to do that. Okay. All right. Let's see the title. So this is the actual, okay, where is apply filters? Hold on. I want to see where the actual hook is. Okay, here we go. So this filters the post title. So I don't know what all this code is doing up here, and I don't really care. This is the actual core code for the get the title function, which is a very helpful and well-known function in WordPress. But we did all this get the title stuff, but now what if somebody wants to filter the title and change it and add the word hooked onto the front of it? So that's where this hook gets left dangling out on line 171, return apply filters the title. Now, you see it's not just this one argument. Sorry, let me get the orange off here. It's not just this one argument. There's other arguments dangling out there as well, title and ID, right? And so what that means is that this is where that magic comes in, where we now have the title to play with, is when this apply filters hook was created, when this filter hook was created using the function apply filters, it not only named the hook, but it also passes along stuff for us to work with. So the first thing it passes is the title, and the second thing, which in my case I rarely work with when I'm filtering using the title filter, is the post ID. But so this is where this kind of resolves the magic of where did we get the the title from. So Norm is asking, if a filter hook passes 3 parameters, is it always the first parameter modified that the filter is expecting back? Or do we have to read the frickin' manual to understand what we're actually supposed to pass back? As far as I know, it's always the first, the first parameter that it's expecting. So it gave us the ID as a convenience, so that we don't have to like call get the ID or something like that. But it's really expecting the title. It really wants, and I think that, I don't think there's some sort of magic under the hood. I think that's just like the convention. In other words, this function, get the title, it's going to be returning a title. And so because the people who wrote WordPress weren't insane, they wouldn't apply filters the title and the thing it passes back as a modified post ID, because that would just break everything. So does that answer your question, Norm? It's like the way that hooks are written by sane people is that get the title really wants to return a title. And the very last thing it does is apply filters on the title so that if we want to come in and mess with the title before giving it back, we can. And then whatever the result of that was just gets returned out of the end of this function. Well, that means that it's always going to be the case that, and it would be crazy to write the parameter order in the other way. So it's always going to be the case that whatever this resolves to needs to look like a title, because that's what's going to be returned. So I hope that answers your question. I don't think there's some sort of like kind of magic structure that makes what you're saying have to be true, Norm. But in practice, people who are sane, who are writing code, wants, yeah, it's more like a guideline as opposed to an actual like rule of physics or something like that. But it's always the case that this needs to resolve to something that looks like a post title, because that's what's being returned out of this function. Yeah, so that's a bit of a kind of a deep dive into the leaving hooks dangling out of stuff. And again, if you're just sort of getting into this topic, I wouldn't worry too much about this. The important thing is to know how to write hooked functions. And the only reason I showed you that code was so you would know where this magic title variable came from. And I want you to know, you could name this anything. You could name this, bath mat, you could name it France, whatever you want. You can name your variables whatever you want. The thing you're going to be passed is always going to be the title string that you're being given to work with. So this is a very, very simple example of a filter. And I went and showed you the filter hook itself in WordPress's code. I think for good measure, I'm just going to kind of quickly show you the WP footer action hook, just to get that kind of parallel going. So you see, look, WP footer, it's a hook, but you see they registered it with do action. See, they didn't register it with apply filters, they registered it with do action. Do action is the function you use to register an action hook. Apply filters is the function you use to register a filter hook. Now, why don't they say apply action, apply filters, or do action, do filter? I couldn't tell you. It's just a bad naming convention. And if you don't like those, then you will be frustrated in WordPress. Okay, so you see this function WP footer, all it is a wrapper for this do action WP footer. I know this is this might not make the most sense, but the point is almost every WordPress theme in existence has a place where they call WP footer in footer.php. And WordPress registers this function WP footer, and all that function does is it just calls do action WP footer. So it would be a little bit easier. You could save some lines of code by having every theme author in the world simply call do action WP footer somewhere in their footer.php. But I think it's better. They probably did it this way because theme developers are like myself. I'm more comfortable just calling a function with no arguments than I am, learning enough about the hook system to do this. So I just want to show you, like, maybe I'll just go ahead and show you let's see. Here, I'm going to drop the screen share for a second. I'm just going to show you in footer.php where we're calling that WP footer hook. And I'll just sort of show you kind of point by point how us calling that function in our theme causes that do action call to appear, and how that causes hooked actions to run. Okay, so, all right. Here, let me pick the screen share back up. And by the way, if I lost somebody 5 or 10 minutes ago, now would be the time to say it. In fact, I'm even gonna stop talking for about 30 seconds just to give people time to catch up, because obviously this stuff makes pretty good sense to me, but that's not really the that's not really the goal. So would anybody like to ask any question? Can be, there are no stupid questions, you know, just about what we've covered so far. Doing good, says Norm. Okay. Okay, most of the content explains the WP footer. How about we talk about some core hook or just the admin dashboard hook? I see. Okay. So, okay, John, you want a super brief summary? Okay, super brief summary for those who joined late. We're talking about WordPress hooks. There are two kinds of hooks, action hooks and filter hooks. So when we say WordPress's hook system, we're talking about a system of actions and filters. Now, we don't really worry, if we're just doing client work, we're not as worried about creating new hooks, either new action hooks or new filter hooks. We're more worried about writing hooked functions, functions that hook onto existing hooks that WordPress core or the theme authors or plugin authors that we're using have created. The core difference between an action and a filter is that an action just runs code. A filter gives you something, you change it, and you have to give it back to the filter using return, PHP's return. So that's the core difference between an action and a filter. A lot of the time an action is echoing something, and all of the time a filter is returning something. So that's super brief summary. Okay, so let me just show you, this is our footer.php for WPShout. And you can see that right before we close our body HTML tag, we have this little call to WP footer, right? If we didn't have that, the site would break. Well, the site wouldn't break, but we would be unable, like anything that was trying to hook on to WP footer would have nothing to hook onto. It would just sort of never run. And so, you know, we might have trouble getting JavaScript into our site's footer, for example. Or, you know, as a more concrete example, the little code we were looking at together, we would be like, well, why isn't the code running? And oh, let's see, WPShout action. Okay. If I didn't have in my theme this call to WP footer, and the way I do that is I call WP footer, and WordPress says anytime somebody calls WP footer, please run this code, do action WP footer. So that leaves an action hook just dangling out there. And that's what lets me or somebody else later come in and say, hey, I want to hook my function, which is named WPShout action example. This is my hooked function. I want to hook that onto WP footer. And anytime, you know, the WP footer hook fires, I want to just print out WPShout was here. Okay. Okay, let's look in the chat here. Can multiple functions connect to the same hook? Yes. If so, what controls their order? Good question. I actually think that's, okay, so that's not in this intro. So I'm just gonna have to show you add action. So the whole point of hooks is that multiple things can connect onto them, because if you just wanted to run one thing, then you would just write it directly into the code. So the whole point of a hook is like, you know, like the title, there could be 30 things that filter the title. Hopefully not, but something, okay, an example where there really would be 30 things is a hook like WP and Q scripts. That's an action hook. I'm just gonna bring it up for you. WP and Q scripts. This is the way to get both JavaScript and CSS into your WordPress site. And this is the hook itself. And then, let's see. So anyway, I won't go to, I don't want to waste your time, but basically a plugin that registers a CSS style sheet, a theme that registers 5 CSS style sheets, another plugin that registers 2 CSS style sheets and 5 JavaScript files, all of those are running are hooking on to the WP and Q scripts action. Now, what order do they go in? That is a very, very good question. And that is this third argument, which is called priority. So in our examples, to keep them simple, we're just using the 2 required parameters for this add action function. But the third is priority. And that is your way of saying who goes first and who goes last. So let me just read this out for you. Priority is used to specify the order in which the hooked functions are executed. Lower numbers go first and higher numbers go last. So really what ends up happening is, the default number is 10. So if you just do it like this, then you can imagine that there's this third argument and the value is set to 10. So the default is 10. Default value is 10. What often ends up happening is you want to cancel out something that a plugin is doing without having to rewrite the plugin. Because if you rewrite the plugin, then the next time the plugin updates, you have to rewrite it again, or else you have to break the plugin so it no longer updates. So you just want to like take a plugin and just change something about what it's doing, like maybe dequeue a piece of JavaScript that's breaking your site or something. And so you actually end up you either usually leave this third argument blank, or sometimes you will go in and you will do it. You will end up writing something like this. $99. So a lot of the time you're saying, I want to run last because I don't care what's happened to the script, the people before me in line. I don't care, who said the script is great and who filtered it and blah, blah, blah. I don't care about that. I want to go last and I want to get rid of the script. So actually we wrote an article on, let's see. Let's see. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to, okay, hold that thought. I'm gonna have to find that article. But basically you'll see that we go in at priority 99 and start removing scripts and styles that we don't want. And if you end up using this priority argument, a lot of the time it's to go last so that your voice overrides all other voices. I hope that answers that question. Can you write the add action? Dylan says, can you write the add action line before writing the function? Absolutely. So I think, yeah. So in these examples I wanted to show you, you'll actually see that add filter or add action or whatever comes before the named function, before the filter or action function that's actually being written. In fact, this is considered better practice, I would say, because you just get an at-a-glance look at what you're hooking onto. These two things kind of like are right next to each other, versus if I write my giant weird long function and then here's the thing that calls it, I'm kind of having to scroll up and down. So it won't affect the function. It won't affect the functioning of what you do, but this is actually, in my opinion, slightly tidier code. Somebody should have a look at the WordPress coding standards and see what they say, but I prefer this. Okay, Arun, okay. Hold on, I'm getting a few things here. Let me kind of go in order. Oops, okay. Arun says, can we see some hook that developers actually use inside the dashboard? Well, if you're talking about a hook that is used inside the admin dashboard, geez, that would, I'm not going to show you any specific examples of that, but I will suggest, Arun, that you look at admin and Q scripts, which is your way to get JavaScript and CSS into the backend, the admin area, WP admin. So I would, yeah, like this article by Pippin's Plugins is probably going to be really good. Loading scripts correctly in the WordPress admin. So that would, basically it's going to tell you how to use admin and Q scripts, which is an action hook that only fires on the backend in the WP admin area. And let's see, WPShout get options, make options page. So like, and then this article on making a WordPress options page. Let's see, yeah, so this would be an example. So add action, so the hook is called admin menu, the function is called awesome page create, and we're running a function called add menu page that has a bunch of arguments, right? So yeah, I would definitely look at this article, and this is a very concrete example of what it sounds like you're asking for, which is like, can you show me how the hook system works for things that run in the WP admin area? So yeah, take a look at that. Okay, let's see what else we got. Why is it a bad idea to not use WP&Q script? Oh, you're saying, why would you not add JavaScripts like just by hand, like in the footer or something like that? I'm assuming that's what that question is. The reason that's a bad idea is exactly because of the way the hook system works. If you just look, if I go into, you know, the footer.php of WPShout, right? And I say, and this will actually work, by the way, echo get pranked. Okay, echo, da 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 da. This needs a semicolon. Oh, and it needs a closing script tag. Okay, so why do we not enqueue our scripts this way? Why don't we just put our script where we want it, down here in the footer, and just be done with it? Well, the reason is, let's say this is my theme and I'm gonna sell this to somebody, okay? Well, nobody can do anything with this code. It's just sitting there. Somebody's gonna have to go into this PHP file and delete stuff out of it. And then the next time the theme updates, it's gonna reappear. You've basically taken yourself out of WordPress's events system entirely. You've just got this code sitting there that nobody can talk to. So now every time that WordPress loads, that WPShout loads, it's going to be popping up a JavaScript alert that says get pranked until somebody can come in and change it. If you go through WP&Q scripts, then I can enqueue my little get pranked script, right? Here, let me show you. Let me show you what I mean by WP&Q scripts. Okay, let's see. Yeah, so this is an example, right? WP&Q scripts. Well, that's the name of an action hook. And then we've got a little function called QG&Q, which is our hooked function, right? And we're going to enqueue a script, QEG.js, whatever. And then this little JavaScript file could just be a thing that says alert get pranked, right? But if somebody is tired of getting that alert every time they open up their web page, every time they open up a page on their website, they can go in and they can WP-DQ script this QG.js script, and they can do it with priority 99, and they can change, they can modify, and in this case cancel out your code without having to go in and actually modify physically your PHP code directly. So the reason that we use the WP&Q script system to enqueue our CSS and our JavaScript is because if we don't, people have to go in and like change our code directly. They have to go in and like modify our themes and plugins. Whereas if we do, they can just leave our themes and plugins alone and they can make their own alterations. That's pretty much the whole value of the WordPress kind of events-driven system, which is what the hook system is. So I hope that answers that question. Arjun says, sorry, I've been calling you Arun. Arjun asks, why DQ? Why not just remove the code where the WP&Q script is in the code? That's the point I'm making. I don't want to go into your plugin and start deleting PHP code. For one thing, if I do that, then I can never update your plugin ever again. I also don't want to go in your theme and start deleting PHP code, because if I do that, I can never update your theme ever again. Because when I do, an update just drops the entire new version of a piece of software on top of the old version. So my changes are going to be lost if I do that. The other thing is, I really only want to be writing my own plugins. I don't want to be understanding the way your mind works in your million-line plugin and finding the line of PHP code that I need to delete. I just want to be able to say, he enqueued this JavaScript. I don't understand why he did that, but I don't want it. So luckily, he enqueued it the right way, and I can go in and in my own environment, dequeue that script. And it means that I don't have to be manually editing your code. Okay, Richard asks, hold on one second. Norm asks, if a certain third-party hook is priority 10, but you want to force it to run at a lower priority, is it possible to reprioritize that hook with no access to that code? The answer is no. So you would have to, you would just have to run whatever it is you want to run at priority 10 or higher. I've never had the problem you're describing. So like, it's not like I sit there on a Tuesday going, oh, I wish I could force something priority 10 to run at a lower priority. But the answer to your question is no, I don't believe that is possible. Richard asks, what is a good way to see the hooked functions that have already been defined by a site's plugins? Is it possible to see the path of execution through all the hooked functions? That's a very, very good question. And I'll bet you there is a way to do that, but I don't know what the way is. The way it works for me, and this is where I kind of want to show you some of the code like little instances that I had prepared. Let me just do a time check as well, because I just want to make sure. Okay, so we got 15 minutes. So I want to show you real quick, just some real out in the wild examples of WordPress hooks. And these come from a site, writers.com, that we manage. If any of you guys are looking for online writing, creative writing classes, come on down. So I'm first going to show you an action hook, and an action function. And then I'm going to show you a filter hook and a filter function. So this action, okay, so the action hook is EM, event output show condition. EM stands for Event Manager, which is the system that the people who built this site before we came along used to put events on the course calendar for writers.com. This hook was created by the Event Manager plugin itself. It's a hook that was registered just deep within the plugin. And I wrote a thing that runs at priority 1, meaning it's the first thing that runs. I can't remember why I needed to do that, but I did. And it takes 4 arguments, and then these are the arguments: show, condition, flow matching, and event. And then I just do some really complicated stuff to it. I grab the post ID of the event, and I basically get, as a Unix string, the time that the event ends, and show is, oh my God, this is confusing me. Okay, this is a bad example. I think I might have to, this is confusing me, so I don't want to confuse you guys more than I'm confused myself. So I might actually just end up writing an action for us to look at together. But I did want to show you this filter. The filter hook's name is script loader tag. This is defer scripts. It runs at priority 10 and it takes 3 arguments: tag, handle, and source. And what this is doing is it basically, I have manually put together an array of JavaScript tags, the tags of enqueued JavaScript files. And for each of those handles, I'm basically changing the script tag so that, wow, this is confusing me as well. Oh my God, this is such a bad look. Okay, hold on. Okay, I've got something in the chat, and then I'm just gonna start coding so that we can, that I can show you guys something that I myself can understand under time pressure. So let's see here. Okay, Arjun, but why dequeue? Okay, Arjun asks, using ACF or programmatically while making a custom post type, which makes more sense in a way. Arjun, for most client sites, you should use advanced custom fields to register custom fields. But yeah, that's not kind of none of that has anything to do with hooks, basically. Okay, so let me just live write some hooks so that you guys can see them being made, and we can actually kind of see it in action. So I am going to share my screen. It's funny. Before this call, both of those functions made sense to me, but I guess it's a deer in the headlights thing. All right, so I'm gonna, you should probably not cowboy code like this. And if I do end up breaking something, I can always, FTP, so I can unbreak WPShout. But what I want to do is, I am going to just kind of as an Easter egg for the people watching this. I'm going to just make some changes to this page. So the first thing I want to do is get the post ID, and this is a nice trick in WordPress if you're not aware of it. You can get the post ID just through the query string at the top of the page like this, and you don't even have to navigate to the top of the page. If you go edit post, you see at the bottom of the very bottom left of my screen, there's like a little gray thing that sort of fades in and out, and it's got the post ID right in there. So that is going to let me just kind of playfully only, here, I'm going to close these. That's going to let me just kind of playfully only change things on this page without affecting anything else. So, and I'm going to go ahead and just do it in my themes functions.php. If this was real functionality that I wanted to persist, I would almost certainly write it into a plugin, because it's, well, it depends. If it was changing mostly display, I would write it into a theme. If it was changing mostly, like functionality or the way data is, I would write it into a plugin. But first I'm going to just write a little action function, and I'm going to hook it onto, okay, well, I think somebody said don't use WP footer because that's what all the examples use. So I'm going to hook it onto the WP head hook, action hook, and we'll call it WPShout Easter egg head. Okay, so now we're going to name our thing this, and the very easy thing we can do is we'll just say echo we were here, maybe a little smiley face. Okay, now this is going to run everywhere if I do it like this, but I want to kind of encourage you guys to start thinking in terms of guard clauses. And what that means is we can write little conditionals that basically say, hey, only run where I want you to run. So I want to 7284, is that the right post ID? Yeah, I only want this to run on post ID 7284, which is just the article on hooks. So I'm going to say if it's not a singular post with post ID 7284, we're just going to return. We're not going to have any effect. And let me just make sure I used is singular right. Can I pass a post? Okay, I think I might need to use is single for that rather than is singular. Let me just check. Is single. Okay, yeah, so we can pass an integer in, which will let us, yeah. So this is the post ID pass in as an integer. So I'm going to say, look, if this isn't a single post with post ID 7284, we're not going to do anything. But if it is, we're going to echo we were here in a smiley face and we're done. So we've got our action, we're hooking onto WP head, we've got our action function WPShout Easter egg head, and I'm just going to go ahead and update our functions.php and see if anything breaks. It's really thinking about it weirdly. Not sure why it's taking so long there. Okay. All right. So here we are on post 7284, which is WordPress hooks, actions, and filters. And let me see if my thing managed to work, and it looks like it didn't because we're live coding. Let's see. Well, let me just put it in the footer and see if it worked that way. It could be that auto optimize is kind of grabbing all that stuff together. There's a million reasons it couldn't have worked, but let's see. Okay, there it is. So it didn't work on WP head, not sure why, but then this is that just being kicked out to the footer. And you should probably be able to see it. I'm just going to reload this page. Yep, and there it is. So I would have loved to hook onto something other than WP footer, but just for this very quick, very live demonstration, we're just going to have to live with that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and maybe filter the content. Okay, come on. I'm going to change it to a filter, and this time we're going to do the content. The name of this filter hook is the content. I'm just going to change the name of the function to just WPShout Easter egg content, right? Now, we have to do something different this time. We have to pass something in. And just to make the point that I can name my variable whatever I want, I'm just going to name it passed in content. And of course, I could name it anything, but I'm just going to name it that. Now, let me show you. Okay, so if I ran this code like this, a bad thing would happen, because if it's not post ID 7284, it just returns, but it returns nothing. So if I just hit update file right now, every post except this post on WPShout would suddenly have no content. But if I say, hey, return passed in content unaltered, then that basically gets passed in content, does nothing with it, and so we're safe. And then for the one, place that we want to, for the one, post whose post with ID 7284 that we actually do want to affect, let's just say hi and start reading, and then we'll do this. And I cannot guarantee you that this is going to work because I am never sure, but I don't see a reason why it wouldn't. Yeah, so there it is. So you can see that, and I guess just to make the point, let's just look at another article, and you should see that our guard clause is working. Let's find a short one. Yeah. So you can see that our guard clause on the filter we wrote is working. This thing, this article from this week, right, has post ID 20,683, which doesn't match the post ID that we're looking for. So all that happens is that passed-in content is returned unaltered, so there's no effect. And therefore, on this post, we don't get this like special kind of Easter eggy first paragraph. And similarly on our action, this still doesn't line up, so it's just going to return without doing anything. And so we don't get any change to our footer section. Whereas on the post whose ID we're actually looking for, we do. So yeah, those are some demos. They're obviously not terribly glamorous, but those are some actions and filters in practice. I'm going to go ahead and stop talking, and I would really just love to hear any questions you guys have, and it can be basic or it can be fairly advanced. If it's like, I understood everything you just said for the past 55 minutes, but what's been really bothering me is X, then now would be a good time to write X. Arjun asks, I see that you don't have a styles.css file. How is the theme built? Let's see. No, let's see. Fairly sure we do have a style.css file, but No, we do have a style.css file. Let me show you. Yeah, this is style.css. Basically, WordPress, they don't really want you messing around with PHP using this like absurdly bad workflow. So they're like, hopefully he's trying to edit the style sheet. So they put it up at the top, even though it's not alphabetical. But yeah, we have a style.css file, just like almost any theme. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, Arjun says you can't see style.css like doing a control U thing. In other words, he's saying you can't see style.css in the source of the page. If you go to WPShout, let me tell you what I'm talking about. Okay, so if I go to this thing and if I do view page source, which is control U, I just get all the HTML dumped out, right? And he's saying he looks for style.css. You can't find it. The reason that is because we're using a plugin called Auto-Optimize that basically mushes both CSS files and JavaScript files together. It does that for speed. And so it's not, we don't have a bunch of CSS files. We have one giant CSS file mushed together. And all of our styles in style.css are in that giant file. Norm asks, what do you use to find the hooks available in a plugin if you don't have much in the way of documentation? Is it just a matter of searching the source code for do action? Yeah, and I'd be actually happy to show you how that works if I can do it in a timely way. So that events manager plugin that I was telling you guys about, this is the code. Like most, commercially available plugins, it's got a ton of code. I mean, it's just like classes on classes, then it's got a jillion PHP files and stuff. So I'll just sort of show you how I found the actions and filters that I needed to find in the code that I started to show you guys before I realized I wasn't going to be able to explain it very well. Okay, so sorry, let me actually talk you through what I'm doing. I use Sublime Text. Just about any text editor or IDE is going to work similarly. But I'm going to open a folder, and I'm going to, basically I downloaded the plugin locally. I downloaded the entire plugin locally. I'm going to open the folder where that plugin is. I'm going to select that. And then I can just do a, find in folder across the entire plugin. And sure, so as Norm was saying, we can look for do action. And let's see what we get. So you can kind of look through here and sort of see, all the different actions that are being registered. And to be honest, like, there is no easy answer for how to figure out what code within a plugin as complicated as this one is running what thing. Like a lot of the time if I'm doing client work, I will spend maybe, and I'm not trying to do this, I'm not like trying to waste anybody's money or something like that, but I'll spend 3 hours looking for the place that is registering a JavaScript because I want to turn the JavaScript off. Or I want to modify it or something like that. I'll look, a lot of the time the fix is 20 minutes, and finding where among all of the themes and all of the plugins, where the existing code is actually coming from is the hardest part. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. It's basically, I don't have time to go into the tricks I've learned to traverse theme and plugin code quickly and find my way into where it is that's actually relevant. But that is one of the hardest things in WordPress development, and it stays hard. You can do WordPress development for 7 years like I have, and that part stays hard because every plugin developer thinks their own way, and things are buried in partials of files of files of files of folders of and so that stays hard. But there are ways to learn how to do it. Yeah. Arjun says, name the CSS optimization plugin. The name of it is Auto-Optimize, A-U-T, and then the word optimize. Ryan asks, would you include styles in the template part .php file? Usually, Ryan, usually any style sheet you enqueue, you should be enqueuing in either a plugin or in your themes functions.php. You can get a little bit of a speed bonus out of like inlining style. So if I've got CSS styles that apply only to posts of type page, I could just inline those styles in page.php itself, and theoretically it would be slightly faster. But to avoid making everybody's life complicated, I would recommend that you just include all your styles directly within functions, just using WP and Q scripts calls in functions.php or in a plugin. And there's actually, like, again, there are ways to, like, I don't really have time to prove that this code would work, but I'm just going to kind of give you a little sort of a proof of concept. Let me pick up a screen share. Yeah, so you can see, like, this is us loading styles, right? If I only wanted to load, let's see, these font awesome styles on pages, I can't be 100% sure that this would work, but basically, if you just wanted font awesome on your pages but not on your posts, I believe this would work. And if not, something like it would work. So in other words, you can get, that kind of optionality a number of different ways. I would not go towards, registering style sheets only. I would not go towards registering style sheets in your template files. It's just not very, it's just kind of like an awkward practice overall, although I think I have done it once or twice. Okay, what else? Yeah, John says, I don't feel so bad now when I spend forever trying to find things in WordPress. Yeah, I mean, it's just, that's the thing about an event-driven system is you have the title, right? Hey, what's the post's title? It's the simplest thing in the world. But if you've got 50 plugins and a theme and a child theme running, that's 52 things that could conceivably, for reasons known only to them, be changing the post's title. So if your post title is not what you expect, you now have 52 potentially giant bases, like masses of code to comb through to figure out what's breaking it, right? And again, there's ways to do that rather than just like start alphabetically and just waste all day. There's ways to do it quickly, but it's not an easy problem. The fact that any piece of code can touch anything in WordPress's sequence is like kind of the downside of WordPress's events-driven system. And I actually am pretty sure David makes that exact point in our rundown of event-driven programming, which the reason he wrote that article is to kind of lead people into understanding the hook system. So I'm just going to link that in the chat here. Basically, the point is, it's, hey, anything can touch anything. I can write a plugin that touches anything. Wait, a plugin can touch anything. Like anything can break anything. So that's kind of the upside and the downside of this hook system that I've been describing. Let's see. Arjun says, why not make changes in a plugin rather than writing your own plugin? Yeah, you just don't want to be Arjun asked, why not change somebody else's code rather than writing your own? In general, you do not want to be changing other people's code because then you have to figure out how their mind works, and then you have to sort of break their code out of the update flow that keeps plugins and themes updated and secure. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I hope this was helpful, and I hope. Oh, Arjun asks, can you disable core hooks? Disable core hooks? No, you cannot. I mean, you can do anything by breaking the PHP files that that make up WordPress. I mean, you could make WordPress that isn't WordPress. It's actually, the Facebook code base or something. But you don't want to be diving into core files and starting to mess around with stuff and break things. You're just going to really, really cause problems if you do that. Dell asks, where am I broadcasting from? New Orleans, Louisiana. I hope the COVID situation is under control there. No, it is not. Please stay safe. Thank you, will do. Kevin says I was touching my face a lot. Bad habit. I'll work on that. Thank you guys very much. And I'm gonna do another a session on Monday about kind of WordPress career stuff. So I hope you guys can be here for that. And if any of you guys are interested in, really kind of an accelerated pace of learning of this and kind of the other core concepts in WordPress, check out Up and Running. That's our premium course. We're running a sale on it until the end of Monday. And if you have a financial hardship, we can even kind of do a deeper discount if you need. So yeah, thank you guys for being here. I will be back on Monday to talk about WordPress career stuff. I think David's going to be there as well. And nice to see you, ladies and gentlemen. And I hope this was helpful.